would be measured in the specific content area.
Right.
And in many of those courses, we're not going to have any kind of state assessments at all. Textbook companies or others.
One of the things I hear from business people often is the sense that these core responsibilities, these core values, these core character traits are not being exhibited by employees. And I hear it over and over and over again. So whatever we're currently doing, in my opinion, is not working to the extent that they should be. So I think we need to, as we're doing, reassess what we're currently doing and maybe go further, be more specific and create some kind of a system that ensures that our graduates do have these characteristics and traits.
Great. Well, any other comments on the topic of character education? I'm just going to check with BJ to see if he's able to speak. Doesn't seem so.
Gordon, I can hear you. Can you hear me now?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I can tick kind of through my list, but I don't know if I want to maybe turn it over to my two colleagues and see if they have any follow-up on our meeting and some of the topics. Obviously, we started with character education, but there's a number of others. I'm happy to lead that discussion, but just want to make sure I'm aware of that. Okay. So,
Can you hear me now?
we talked about last month was the issue of pre-K.
We can hear you, but they cannot hear you in the room. We're trying to resolve this.
At least for my
Thank
view,
you.
as a board member, a high priority for the state and the legislature to consider expanding the existing pilot program that we have in 5 counties. And you know, there have been a number of proposals as to what an expansion of pre-K might look like, and we don't necessarily, I think, have to weigh in on it or make a recommendation as to any. I mean, we can, if we so choose, make a recommendation simply to expand the existing pilot program, but open to discussion on that. And I think there's a real opportunity for the state to build on the progress that we've made and make our state more competitive with other states that are further along in their pre-K programs. So I'm interested in hearing from my fellow board members.
At the conference last week, the NASB conference, the National Association of State Boards of Education, there were a few sessions dealing with pre-K, and the mantra that I heard was quality pre-K. And there's a sense of quality pre-K, and there's a sense that anything we do, the quality comes forth, and it's right down to teacher quality. Should these people have some kind of a state license, for example, was discussed. That's one quality issue. And so I think that's a key principle when we talk about pre-K, that we have to insist that there's quality, and we need to put out there what does it mean to have a quality kind of program. I think states across the country have really focused in on facilities in particular, but and that's important too, and I think we need to look at more of the personnel, the talent that works with pre-K students. So I would just add that one component in there, that we need to figure out what the quality is and move forth on that. The big issue in Indiana, of course, is the funding, I believe, and we seem to have 2 camps. One wants to expand it pretty dramatically, pretty quickly, and the other camp seems to say let's phase it in over time. And that's just a political decision and a funding issue that's more legislative, I think, than our State Board of Ed. But I think we need to be strong advocates for quality. So I would hope that we would expand it in such a way that we can ensure that there's quality. doesn't make sense to expand it across the state and have no quality. So I'm in favor of doing pilots, make sure there's quality there, and build them out as we can assure that there's quality in each one of those new sites.
Well, I would just comment on that, and then we mentioned this at the last meeting as well, is that the current pilot program requires, certain, I think, level 3 and 4 path quality. So that is a requirement of the pilot program that, that there are, the access that's being given to pre-K programming is high quality in nature with a set of very clear standards. So I would, I definitely agree with what you're saying, and should the pre-K program be expanded, it absolutely has to be in a way that, that is a high quality program.
And 2 or 3 issues here, and just to follow up to a couple of comments. I agree on the quality issue, and as I think about, the various levels of quality, there are many things that go into providing quality, and oftentimes people look at preschool as a push down of kindergarten into starting students earlier, and it really has to be curriculum designed, age appropriate for 3 and 4-year-olds. And it's a very different set of expectations and standards, and then how it lines up with a kindergarten experience moving into K-12. I think 2 other issues, my take on this is I believe we should drop the pilot and move to full implementation and make it very clear that our state is headed to complete and comprehensive preschool for all children in the state of Indiana. And while I'm also a proponent of the all-in and let's go, I also believe the phase-in makes a lot of sense. And for me, it's not a political issue. It is really around preparation. And there's a lot at the school level, the district level, to prepare for preschool. You mentioned one of those issues. That means my time is up. But one issue is facilities, and I don't think it's something that we can ignore. And the fact that if you are, regardless of the size of your district, some districts will have capacity, others will not. A phase-in would allow districts to decide and prepare for those students. Second is the training of teachers, and making sure that we have an adequate supply of highly qualified professionals going into preschool education. I think it would be actually an exciting area for our state from a teacher preparation perspective, and also making sure that our university is prepared to prepare preschool teachers. So whether, I'm not suggesting a number of years, but whether it's a 3, 4, 5-year phase-in would give school districts an opportunity to apply to move at a pace that accommodates their local issues, and also allow us to ramp up the teacher preparation programs in our state. I just, one last point, when we talk about a political issue, and I think for me, and what I have observed over the last 15 or 20 years as an advocate of preschool programs, is really the resistance we get from the private sector. And while it may not come out as very clearly, but a lot of private providers, a lot of religious institutions providing preschool, and this will go in direct competition with those organizations. And it's just something that we have to acknowledge, but move forward that we have a comprehensive pre-K program in the state of Indiana.
Yeah, I don't know if we need to necessarily make specific recommendations. I think we can talk further about that, but I just, speaking for myself, that we will have universal pre-K in the state at some point.
Yeah, we've been saying that for 20 years, though. And I think we can take a strong position that this is absolutely essential for our children. We are making a huge there's a social injustice in our state for children who aren't getting preschool. And affluent people can afford to pay for it for their children. Many other children cannot afford to have access to this. And it appalls me when we think about, You know, even people who resist preschool saying and questioning its importance, yet the same people who question its importance are the one paying for it for their own children. And I just think it's absolutely essential. Whether we take a very specific approach and so forth, we've been saying this is important for 20 years. And it's not that important. It's not that important because we're not doing it. All you can do is look at our state budget, you can look at the funding for it, you can decide what is important in our state. And this has not been important. So frankly, I would like to take a stronger position to say, it's not about we are going to have it, but we need to have it now. And we need to make a strong commitment to this and signal that we're very serious about it. But that's just a personal view.
Yeah, you know, and the reason I make that statement is that business and economic development, as you know, Vince, will demand it. And so if we're going to attract the kind of talent to our state, and we need to have policies that, you know, ensure that we have a educated workforce. And I guess what I would say is, you know, on the specific question of the pilot, you know, we see from the applications that something like only 1 in 3 who wants access to the program, at least in Marion County, is able to take advantage of the program. So clearly there is demand by families that meet the income restrictions of the pilot program. And literally thousands of kids are being turned away or have been turned away in the last couple of years. And I agree with you, it's you know, if you can afford to pay, you know, $10,000 to $12,000 per year for a quality program for preschool, I mean, that's a lot of money. And it seems to me that we should be expanding the existing program, especially because it's clear there's demand for it. Because parents know that it gets their kids ahead and gets them better prepared for kindergarten and beyond. So clearly the demand's there, and I agree with you that the board should take a strong stance.
So if there's consensus on this committee, which there appears there is, what are the next practical steps? We can talk and talk and talk, and we've been talking for 20 years apparently, and I believe that because many states go through that, but how do we get this issue moving forward? Obviously, we have to go to our full board, but are you looking at some kind of a motion, or what's the next steps? I'm looking at staff also. It seems like we're in agreement with this. How do we get the issue moving and not stuck within this committee or within our State Board of Education?
Well, I think it's just it's a policy statement or a policy
resolution, or
it's part of a resolution. I anticipate a resolution on each subject that we don't necessarily have to vote on it as a full slate. You know, maybe we go one by one, but it seems to me that we should at least have a general statement of, you know, the board is supportive of expanding the existing pilot pre-K program, and then maybe include some, you know, relevant whereases that explain our reasoning and our background for, you know, for encouraging the legislature to take further action.
looking at the timetable, and we're already getting close to a legislature coming back, and so I would urge us to move forward as quickly as possible. Mr. Chairman, are you looking for maybe staff to send us a resolution, at least on these two issues, to start within a couple of weeks, so that we can review it and then...
Just a draft. Doesn't have to be a final product, but...
And then maybe, you know, December meeting-ish, take it, because I think we need to get these issues rolling and get a sense of our committee members. If people are for it, great, let's move it forward. If there's some disagreement, let's talk about it and see what the disagreement is and see if we can shape it in such a way that addresses their concerns. But the pre-K issue, I haven't heard any other board member disagree with the need to move forward. So I think we need to do it pretty dramatically. A resolution is fine. I'm not sure how that's taken, and so we can start with the resolution, but maybe we need to look at some further steps to push the issue.
One other thing, this just again, from a personal perspective, when I think of pilot, to me, that signals non-committal. We're going to try it out. There is so much evidence around early childhood education. This isn't an experiment. What we're basically doing is saying we're going to provide this for a few kids in the state of Indiana. We're going to do it because here's how much money we're willing to spend on it right now. We're not piloting this. We're not piloting early childhood to see if it works. We know the results. We know years of research on early childhood education. And this is really around a funding issue. And I think we need to stop saying we're piloting this thing. We're not piloting. We need to move toward full comprehensive preschool. And then if we have a phase in, that's a very different perspective. Pilot suggests to me that we may not do it any longer. And to Gordon's earlier point, if we're going to signal to the business community and to others and outside of the state that we're serious about this, then we need to be able to say we're serious about it. And I don't believe we can say that today.
In addition to the funding issue, Vince, do you see this being part of a public school, potentially, and totally public school, or will there be options for those who are currently operating within the system if they meet quality indicators? Of course, that's a big if.
Yeah, but we have charter school law now. So I could see whether a provider becomes a charter school provider or goes into a pre-K system. I think the mechanisms, the structure is already in place for that to occur. If we want to extend charters.
It's essentially operating as a voucher program right now. Right? You have private school pre-K providers, and there's a tuition reimbursement
Yes.
for the program.
And you could argue that all of our schools are operating kind of like a voucher system right now. Dollars follow the kids,
Sure.
right? So you choose to go school ed, you take the dollars with you. And
The distinction, though, one is public, one is
that's, yes.
My only point is to start, I think we need to keep it open. And then when we set forth some indicators of excellence that everyone has to meet, then that'll be determining factors of who can handle it and who cannot, depending on those standards. There may be some private organizations financially that will not be able to meet what we're going to require for quality indicators, potentially. But I wasn't sure where Vince was going, if he was just going to say only public schools. I'd like to keep it open, at least at the beginning, and see which organizations can meet it. There may be some businesses out there, some corporations that do a great job that could meet new indicators.
Sure, that was the point. I think we have structures in place that could support a variety of school types.
Okay.
I think that would be an appropriate issue. I think the other thing when we think about from a funding perspective, I think it's going to be an important policy question, is whether this is income-based, or are we going full comprehensive preschool for all students? Now we provide a free public education for all children of a certain age. The age is dictated by statute. That age is reduced, to include 4-year-olds. Then do they become part of the funding formula, or is it just simply an expansion of a system that provides support for low-income children?
Right.
But I see it as a full pre-K, K-12 system, that provides an education for all children, those who want to access it. We're still going to have children and families that choose to access other options, and they certainly have the ability to do that, the right to do that.
I actually tend to agree with Vince that, this isn't providing, food for somebody who can't afford to put food on the table. This is an education. To me, that's something very different. And while the case may be strongest for those who may not have the opportunity otherwise to send their kids to a quality pre-K program, it seems to me like right now there are folks who are fit squarely in the middle class don't have access to these kind of programs because they just simply can't afford them. And it seems to me that there is a strong case for ensuring that that a greater percentage of, and maybe it's universal, maybe not, but greater percentage of citizens of Indiana have access to this kind of program.
Yeah, and we had this brief discussion at our last meeting as well, and it was one of the real challenges, and something I feel strongly about, is the way in the United States we use a static poverty line, and it really doesn't take other conditions into effect at all. And I struggle with this when it comes to the school free reduced lunch program as well as textbooks. Mm-hmm. So you can have a family that perhaps is just over the poverty line from a total income perspective, and for a family of 4, but it doesn't take into consideration $100,000 in hospital bills and medical bills and other type of things that are devastating families, and none of that's taken into consideration. So you may not be eligible for those resources, but we don't know the deeper story.
Right.
And it doesn't, the line doesn't move for those families.
It's a really good point.
I mean, literally, we have people, and this is more of a poverty issue than it's preschool issue, but I'll make one point. I mean, we have people that are avoiding taking raises for jobs. Right. To stay below the poverty line, because as soon as they go above it, a 5-cent an hour raise takes away all their benefits. Mm. That just doesn't make sense to me. So this will not be solved in the preschool issue. However, I think it is an important consideration, going back to Gordon's point, is that if we're going to provide free public education for all children in the state of Indiana, I think it's a great message to send and way to support all families in our state.
Okay. Well, again, if you could, this is less of a, search the landscape and more of just coming up with some language and some options that, just in a draft form that we can consider and work with. Next on my list is the issue of, and I think we could maybe dispense with this one pretty quickly, the issue of the textbooks and the tax deduction. You mentioned it already. Tax deduction or funding the schools for removal of textbook fees. I liked your point, I think it was your point, Vince, last month that said it ought to remain a tax deduction, if I'm not mistaken.
I don't recall saying that specifically, but here was the concern I have about it may have been framed that way. So here was my bigger concern. I have seen a number of states paying for textbooks out of the state budget, and it's just paid for. And every time there is some kind of a budget crisis, that is a line item that gets pushed. It's like, well, we can use the textbooks for another year, another 2 years. I go into states in which we've used textbooks for 10 or 12 years. And right now we're able to stay on a pretty consistent cycle for textbook adoption in the state because families are renting them. So the tax credit opportunity, if that's a possibility of avoiding, the expansion or the extension of the cycle, I think it would be advantageous. So that's what I was referring to. So if we believe from a policy perspective, the tax credit would actually provide that kind of, or disincentivize us from doing that, then I think that's a positive thing.
Well, if I can say too, without getting too weedy on the legal distinctions, right now there's a tax deduction, if I'm not mistaken, for private school students of $1,000
on textbooks.
I don't think it's specific to textbooks or anything else. I think it's just a general deduction. Okay. So to me, that's the easiest way to expand this to public school students as it relates to textbooks.
Add the deduction or credit?
Well, I believe it's an existing deduction. It seems to me the path of least resistance or the easiest way to do it is by doing a deduction. But, obviously deduction is different from a straight up one-to-one credit.
Sure.
So, but that's something that, once it's in law, like to your point, Vince, about the state pays for and then maybe it gets taken away, it's harder to take away a tax deduction.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. I'm wondering too, so would the current system remain then for children on free reduced lunch? They would get their textbooks under a statewide item. Now school districts are reimbursed for those students. Right? And then the families who pay.
Right.
So only those then above the free reduced lunch and textbook threshold would get the tax deduction for the textbooks.
I just wonder if do you shortchange potentially, obviously there would be a difference, right? So
Yeah,
I want to make sure no one would get shortchanged.
I completely agree with you. I'm just thinking too about families that are cash out of pocket. If they had to pay and then take a deduction and then only get the benefit of reducing their taxable income, which depending on the level of what they're paying in taxes.
Right.
So they could be actually disadvantaged or be put in a position where they have to come over with cash each semester to pay for textbooks. Now they do not. So how we balance that and ensure that families and students have textbooks in a timely manner would be another consideration.
As we talk about textbooks, I cringe as I see students carrying these large backpacks with 6,000 pounds of books and things, and I have a few friends who are chiropractors who just stay in business via the textbooks that we require. So if we're going to get into this, I think we need to sort of have discussion too about online textbooks. This notion that we have printed textbooks and they don't change for a number of years and life changes and probably the content should change. With an online kind of resource that could be updated pretty quickly. And I wonder if we would save money just by virtue of having online resources available. I have no sense of how many school districts are using a particular textbook. But what would happen if the state would provide an online version of that textbook, the most common ones across the state of Indiana, and we just pick that up in our state budget. And so that'd be an incentive to the school district, maybe to provide some online resources for students. And I understand there are some districts that have gone to one-to-one online textbooks and education, and others have not. But seems like we're back 50 years ago talking about textbooks, adoption of textbooks, and I'd like to see us move on in that discussion. We really consider online and how we can save money for parents with online kind of resources.
I guess that's why I like the idea of just an overarching deduction, that we don't necessarily get too specific, because then a deduction you could arguably use it for textbook or to offset the cost of textbooks, or you could use it to offset the cost of future technology. So it's just something that is put into law to benefit, most Hoosier families that have kids in public schools that are currently paying for textbooks.
Yeah, the deduction on an individual basis, I agree with it. It's just how we get it done. But what I'm looking at is, as a state of Indiana, do we save money with textbook publishers by having an online statewide system where parents may get more money back in the sense of not having to pay out? The other issue on school textbooks we talked about the last meeting was school supplies. And I remember going to, first time I was in Indiana many years ago, going to Walmart, Target, and seeing these lists of supplies that students had to bring in. I was totally confused coming from Massachusetts, where schools provide those school supplies. And In Massachusetts, according to their constitution, free and appropriate education included the Kleenex box and the pencils and pens and the papers that students needed. So I was really surprised in Indiana when I saw these multiple lists for every school in the region on what parents had to buy. And so I think that's another area that we should really take a look at. I'm not even sure it's legal, Brian. Even the state of Indiana, our Constitution says students have a free and appropriate education, and wouldn't pens, pencils, paper that we're having our students buy through their parents, wouldn't that be covered by our state constitution?
So I think the Constitution says tuition free, and then there are subsequent court opinions that say that textbooks, if I'm remembering this correctly, that textbooks are not tuition. Some of those expenses, unless you fall under the free and reduced lunch or certain groups, but in general, they've carved out that as saying, well, that's not really part of a tuition.
So that's textbooks. I was talking about school supplies in particular. Have the courts in Indiana said that that the state does not have to cover that?
I'll take another look, but I believe that falls within the same textbooks, curriculum materials, things like that.
So the concept of having education be more affordable for parents and kids, we're all on board with that. And frankly, I think there's ways that we can make it more affordable and more efficient for people. We want a quality education for every student, and frankly, I think some students aren't getting that quality because of financial considerations that both of you raised, so I'm totally on board with that. It's just a matter of seeing what is and then trying to create a system, whether through tax deductions or different ways to facilitate that learning and that expense.
I presume that the private school deduction was granted because families are paying for a private school and the state is not paying for them. So there's a $1,000 deduction. And I'm wondering, is that deduction still available for students using vouchers going to private schools? If they're enrolled in private school, do they still get the deduction? And I'm wondering to what extent that was adjusted. But I like the idea too of, so make sure, Gordon, what you were suggesting earlier, you're saying just using a tax deduction for everyone, and the state getting out of any free and reduced lunch type of reimbursement to school districts, just everyone gets the deduction. So everyone will be required then to pay out of pocket for their textbooks up front.
I think at least in the short term, that is maybe the cleanest way to do it.
Does everyone have that kind of money to pay for textbooks up front? That's why I was looking for a way that the state could create, maybe at a reduced level, working with textbook companies directly to lower the price to such a point where maybe the state picks up that cost. That's where I'm headed. I think there's some families that can't afford $200-300 to rent these books in addition to school supplies and everything else, and it's a burden on families, and some families cannot afford it, and we need to really look at that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there will be a lot of families that would really struggle with coming up with the price placed on textbooks.
Right.
It's not unusual to have, you mentioned $300 or $400 textbook bills. So, and then to wait for several months to potentially get the benefit of that.
Right.
I'm just wondering if it couldn't be the expansion of what we already have in place. And so we have the free reduced textbooks. So for those children, it's not a problem.
Right.
It's only for those who are paying. And if that tax deduction could be extended to all other families, so you're either eligible for free reduced lunch or free textbooks, or you're eligible for the $1,000 tax deduction, which now extend to all Hoosier families. That would just be an expansion of the current program and maybe an easy resolution to that issue.
Yeah, and I see the deduction also covering the supplies as well. So.
We need to be careful with the term free. It'd be free to the parents, but somewhere it's picked up, that cost, right? Okay, so sometimes free seems free that no one's paying for, but we'd have to find another place. The legislature would have to find another place in the budget or some other mechanism.
So now in Indiana, if you're eligible for free reduced lunch under the National
school lunch program, you're eligible for textbooks. And then that is a calculation the school district does, and the school district reimbursed from the state. Now, that reimbursement back changes too. It's not always 100% reimbursement. And that became an issue 4 or 5 years ago when computers were allowed to be used as textbooks and count as textbooks. So some school districts, I happen to be in one, which we extended 1-to-1, and then count that as a textbook, so all the children are produced lunch and their computer, essentially. And then you could look at the state reimbursement, could go anywhere from 75% to 100%. But interestingly, school districts at one time, and I'm not sure the current rule, were allowed to recover the difference through their tax collections. And so they could be held and be whole on that amount. But that system's already in place. And if we already have a tax deduction mechanism in place for a student who is a private school, if that were extended to all families. But your point is someone's paying for it, it's coming from the state reimbursement.
There may be another resource here with the new federal law, ESSA. There are block grants being returned to the states. And so I think there might be a possibility to fund this potentially with federal money. And so I would ask maybe Brian take a look at that, that if there's block grants coming back to us, if we could redirect those resources to a mechanism that would provide parents and children with books that they would not pay for.
Well, I think we have some potential options to explore, so just ask State Board staff to digest what you've heard and come back to us with a few options for our consideration of what we might do. I guess the only other thing, there's maybe 2 other things on my checklist. One is, we had this discussion about facilities last month, and one thing I think might be interesting to explore as it relates to what some other states have done is the creation of an emergency facilities fund. So, for example, in the city of, in the Cary Public Schools, we saw the, boiler went out, the school district had no ability to fund the replacement. A kid's school was canceled for several weeks, because of the heat issue in the middle of the winter. And so eventually something had to go through the state budget this year. It was kind of a special deal. I think it was $500,000 that was allocated. So there might be there may be the opportunity to create some kind of program within the Department of Ed that, maybe would require state board approval of grants that are for true emergencies for schools that, there may be an impact on student learning. Now, of course, there's a larger discussion that could potentially be had about facilities and deferred maintenance and reserve funds and all that, but I don't know that we necessarily need to get into that for next session, but it's something that is a larger issue of schools and the efficiency of their buildings. We've seen on a number of occasions schools with 300 or 400 students in a facility that's, intended for 1,000, 2,000 plus students, and it's just a huge waste of money. So, to the extent there can be, to the extent we can consider ways to incent or require efficiency in, because any dollar spent on facilities is not being spent on kids. So, you need to see wasteful spending. And I'm sure there's a lot of it. But that's probably an issue for another day.
You see it as a grant program?
One thing I'd like to find out too, and as part of this discussion, to inform this discussion, is the Common School Fund. and also districts authorization to issue general obligation bond. Because now a district can, I believe the threshold is still $2 million, correct? And if it hasn't changed, the school district can issue a general obligation bond under $2 million and waive the responsibility process. And it can actually happen within 2 school board meetings. Right. And so if they needed cash quickly, they could go through that process and just meet the advertising requirements of the state and then issue it for $2 million. And then repay those dollars out of the capital projects fund. So for some school districts that are cash strapped in short funds, a way for them to shift. If they don't have capital project funds available or a rainy day fund to make those payments, they go the GO bond route and repay it under general obligation bond. I believe it's a multi-year repayment plan for that. So, and you can also have multiple GO bonds. And they just can't be an extension of the same project. You can't start building $2 million next year, 6 months later, $2 million more in active building. But if they're separate projects, you can have multiple going on to take care of some of the emergency. But it'd be interesting to see, one, how quickly schools can access those funds. If there's something in an emergency situation that will allow them to access them more quickly. And then to what extent if we have some other fund, as the chairman's suggesting, is it just quicker access, repayment methods, and also presume if those come from the department, they come at a much lower rate than they would get in a bond as a bond.
The other thing that we do have is when we were looking at the East Chicago situation, we put together a list of all the potential, both federal and state funding options that exist, so we could provide that as well. There's quite a few things out there: disaster loans, non-disaster loans, council loans, things like that. So, and then there's also some federal programs. So.
What did we do in the Gary situation? I know we authorized or at least advocated for the advancement of some funds. How did that fund?
For you and me, Chicago.
Yes.
So that's a state statute, a state law disaster loan fund. And that's under the control of the State Board of Education. The State Board took action, and those funds, about $2.8 million, went up there to East Chicago so that they could relocate those students to a safe building, which did in fact occur.
And that was a loan.
That's a loan. It's a 20-year loan at 1%.
Repaid from which fund?
So it is repaid. It is its own. It's its own fund. It's not part of the common school.
No, I mean from the school district perspective. How do they repay it? Is it a capital projects repayment? General fund repayment?
I'm not completely sure, and I know that one of the issues the legislature is going to look at is whether or not they can be potentially forgiven or other options like that. So.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. It also giving school districts the flexibility of the repayment option. Because some are really strapped in a general fund, and if they have to take out a loan, it doesn't really help them. They don't have repayment options there.
Yeah, and there's flexibility when we worked out sort of the contract. There's a lot of flexibility there. So.
One other question that, could I use my rainy day fund to repay that emergency fund?
I think so.
Because really, I mean, because if, just quickly on the rainy day fund allows you to take any funds that have excess and actually move them into a rainy day fund.
Yeah.
So you could take potential transportation funds and excess, move them into a rainy day fund. Then you actually have to establish a budget for your rainy day fund through each budget cycle. So it would be interesting then if I had a rainy day fund and I had repayment methods, if I could use that as a repayment option. And I'm just asking, really it's a question, and if not, giving school districts maximum flexibility in how to repay those loans, I think would be always helpful.
I think there's a bit beyond the 20%, or beyond the 20 years at 1% up to 20, there's a lot of flexibility there. In terms of how to arrange the payments.
The way we handle East Chicago and Gary was on a case-by-case basis. So as we're talking, I'm thinking, is this a state policy issue that we should implement throughout the state of Indiana, or should we handle it the way we did, which was on a case-by-case basis? And I think in the two situations we granted millions of dollars, I think it solved that particular short-term problem. So in my mind, as a policymaker, I'm asking myself, I'm not sure that we need something put into statute statewide. I believe we have access to these $3 million that we allocated, and other state agencies have that money. So I would agree with the chairman who said maybe this isn't an issue that we need to tackle at this point. I would agree. I think there's enough mechanisms currently available to school districts to handle this particular issue, given the other issues that we're trying to get through, particularly pre-K.
I agree, I think that's where there may be this issue around the flexibility in school districts knowing the options available to them.
Sure.
But also when things come to us on a case-by-case basis, I think one thing, obviously there are limited funds available to that, and you could have two school districts with similar type of issues, but also have a very different financial situation. So does an emergency constitute what exactly happened, or is it their access to resources to remedy that problem? And I think that would be something we need to look at, otherwise we can have a lot of boilers go out, it seems like an emergency, right, and they are, but I have capital projects funds available to add a boiler, and school district B doesn't. And how those funds are allocated and available when those emergencies arise. Great.
That's right. Case by case is probably the best on this particular topic.
I think that's all I have on my list. I know there's probably a few other issues, but I'll turn it over to you guys if there's anything else you want to cover.
Just briefly, we didn't talk about this at our last meeting, but the whole assessment system, it looks like the panel that was working on that issue on our behalf did not reach consensus. And I'm wondering if we would need to make a recommendation to the full board around the assessment system itself. How do we move forward? It's obvious to me we're not going to have a new test of any kind. And so do we want to have a discussion here, then maybe a recommendation to the full board on what do we do for next year? Do we have no test? Do we use the current test? Or are there other options? And so I think it would be helpful for us to at least talk about it and see if we reach some consensus that we would make to the entire board on a recommendation.
The panel is still meeting. It's my understanding that they will have some recommendation that will come to the board, and then based on that, then the board can take action. So,
But that's coming to the board.
Yes, it's coming to
in December.
It should be by December. Yeah. That's,
Okay.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
that's all I was
Okay.
to clarify that. So, you could have discussions now, or you could wait and see what they come up with, and then work off that.
So just to be clear, because there were, at our last meeting, there were a whole list of items, those were shared at the full board meeting last time. And are we suggesting that these are the only topics that we're going to take to the full board for their consideration at this point?
Not necessarily. I mean, we had a few other, lists, a few other items on our list, the recruitment and retention of teachers was a topic of discussion. Obviously the superintendent put together a panel that gave some recommendations, I think at the end of last year on the subject. So we could always revisit those and then add to, subtract from.
Do you have a topic in mind?
No, actually, I think of of all the things we discussed last time, I think we hit, for me, the most important, from my perspective, and textbooks and other issues that we should address. I agree with that. I just, we were prioritizing these that we will submit to the full board for their approval as a legislative agenda, saying here are the 3 topics we believe we should pursue from the full list that we came up with the first.
Perhaps what we do is we have, maybe we have drafts.
DJ what?
Has left the conference.
Bit of a discussion at the board level at the next meeting, because that'll give us a month and to kind of revise and consider alternatives, additions, subtractions for the December meeting.
Other board members may have topics that they would want us to consider.
Right.
That would probably
Rather
come
than
back to
throwing
us.
on people in December and saying up or down, and then if somebody has an addition, then we're,
I said that was your intent the last meeting to say, here's where we're at, here are the topics we're discussing. If you have other topics.
I have not heard from any board members.
So I think it would be, we're getting close on, really close here. And I like the idea of even putting out the board member right away and say, here's a topic to discuss, do you have anything else? You need to hear from me quickly. So hopefully the next board meeting, we will be able to zero in on what that list looks like.
Well, and we're talking a few weeks from now, and we may even be in a position to consider some of these issues.
So, Mr. Chairman, your intent is to have potentially a resolution on each of the 3 topics we talked about. We'll have staff send us those resolutions, we can comment back and forth, and then hopefully at our next meeting, we would present those resolutions and see if there's any input on those, and then separately, additional topics that they would like us to consider. Is that where you're headed with
I don't
this?
know that we need to necessarily, that's maybe a to be determined. Just not sure right now whether we actually present full resolutions at the next meeting or we drill down further on specific topics and ask for input from the full board as well as thoughts for additional topics to be considered.
I want to remind us that the timetable is moving very,
Has
very
joined the
quickly.
conference.
And I would urge us, if a resolution is ready that we've agreed to, like the pre-K resolution, I don't think there's going to be too much disagreement with that, that I would hope that we would put that forward for an up and down vote. And if it's voted down, then we could take those comments back and then rework the resolution. But given the time, and the legislature's going to move pretty quickly, I'm hoping we could get some of these things into the hopper and have them be aware of what we're trying to do.
Okay. So why don't we make an effort to do that? I think that makes sense. I think it'd be helpful on each of these to have just not a comprehensive, background piece, but, a 1 or 2 page supporting memo that just kind of describes, why we're making these recommendations. And the kind of the support for the policy. So, for instance, on pre-K, the National Institute of Early Education Research has a excellent scorecard by state. And, to be quite honest, it's kind of embarrassing. We have a pilot program, but we're, getting our, what kicked by states like West Virginia and Kentucky. So I think that's the kind of
Did
background.
you just name 2 states?
That's the kind of background.
You name several more.
Right, send your emails to
And the great state of Massachusetts, the great state of Massachusetts as well.
I went to school in Kentucky, just for the record.
No, I was not saying that
You're
necessarily
complicated.
pejorative, but I was saying that in terms of states that are generally in the region that have significantly better programs than we have. So But I think that's a kind of like background material that maybe a lot of folks, including legislators, don't have. I'm sure some do on the education committee, but many may not understand where we stand from a competitive basis, as well as why it's important. So I think those kind of broad strokes in a supporting memo would be helpful.
So do you envision a resolution and a memo or a white paper, sort of a list of recommendations, background, specific recommendation, or?
I think, let's, if you can come back to the members of this committee with a draft resolution or resolutions on each of the subjects, and, it doesn't have to be, the Declaration of Independence or anything, but just, in a couple of them, we might have options, right? So, in draft form, as well as just a supporting memo that explains the reasoning behind making a recommendation. Okay. So, maybe by, the next couple of weeks, if that time works. I don't think it's too, it's in rocket science, I don't think it's too, we're hopefully giving you good direction and run with it. Okay. But yeah, just, again, draft form, let us comment, and then I think hopefully we can have something on the agenda maybe at the next meeting.
You're talking about November?
Yeah.
When's the deadline to submit? Is it November 9th?
It's 5 days before, right?
Do you think we'll have enough time?
Set for action items. I can put it on as a placeholder.
No, I would go ahead and put it on as a placeholder so it's in there.
Okay.
We may not, oftentimes we receive materials the night before, right? So we have to, right?
These topics, so we're in preschool textbooks
Character.
and character ed. Okay, so we have, at least what I have read to this point, rather comprehensive proposals already being advanced for preschool and textbooks, correct?
I don't know about textbooks. I know there are many talked about. Are you talking about for the state board or for?
No, not from the state board,
For the
but
legislature.
for coming from the state superintendent.
Oh, gotcha.
Textbooks SBOE.
So there's a pre-K experience,
Is that correct?
I'm drafting a pre-K bill right now. And we have textbooks. There's been several fiscal notes that have already been written about textbooks too. Karen County advances that bill every year. So we know the fiscal and that language has already been written. So that's already, the expanding textbook deduction or
Right.
help the right family.
Yeah, we know.
Yeah.
Superintendent made that proposal. So what I was going to say is that the two staffs can coordinate on that, so we can have an understanding of what's being proposed, and maybe we'll support it. I don't know that I've seen anything specific about pre-K though. I know there's been conversation about.
We have a big draft, like white paper, it's about 16 pages about the kind of approach that we would like to see. It's really along the lines of what you were saying, that's ramp up to universal over the course of 4 or 5 years, access for all kids, regardless of income, that kind of thing. And right now I'm working on in the weeds details, funding and stuff to make it happen, dollar amounts and all that stuff. The other kind of proposal out there in other contexts is from the United Way in early living Indiana. They kind of submitted a roadmap for expansion of pre-K. And it's not really that specific, but they're asking for a ramp up kind of a pilot program and probably an expansion of the early education matching grant, which is the other pre-K program we have. So, and we're asking for a more comprehensive statewide approach, because that approach doesn't address the statewide issue, but ours, we want to think about expanding statewide. So that's kind of the direction we're going.
We may not be ready to release your full white paper yet, but.
Oh, it's already out there. It's on our website.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, in that case, if you would share that with staff.
Have you heard anything here today that is contrary or to positions already taken on these issues?
I think that we're really encouraged by it to talk about the tax reduction. Definitely preschool is something that we're on fire about. The character act piece is something I think to look at. We need to take a look. I think, like you said, what schools are already doing, to what degree that's embedded in curriculum right now, and the degree to which the state could dictate curriculum specifically. It's an absolute issue, but you know, we can definitely see what resolution we come up with. So
It's very strong on one and on the other two issues.
that's very strong.
I'm going to just check one more time. BJ, are you able to communicate with us?
I can call him if he can hear us.
Maybe just send him a text message and see if if there's anything else he wants to share with us before we wrap up. Do you have anything else to add? Yep. Okay. We'll just wait a sec. Oh, it's literally just started. Having some technical difficulties.
He said nothing to share.
Okay. Well, unless I hear anything further, take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same signal. We are adjourned. I knew where you were going with that. Thanks very much, everyone.